So there's this amazing essay of Rav Shagar in Shivrei Luchot, in one of his books on postmodernism, where he talks about Jewish ideas versus other religions, Buddhism, Hinduism, that contain similar ideas, nirvana, in Eastern religion versus kind of Ta'anug Shabbat. So I wanted you to kind of like talk a little bit about, and I guess we'll talk about it together, about why follow Judaism as opposed to another religion if there are similar ideas contained in other religions. And I guess this returns to the question for Rav Shagar of safa, of language. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think this is a point that Rav Shagar raises in that essay, and also in many other places, which is that for him, the question of why do one thing as opposed to another thing is always about, because this is who I am, and this is how the way things are and how they're supposed to be. A really good example that he returns to again and again is the moment after you've married your wife. You look back and you know that it couldn't ever have been any other way. That at a certain point, you may have felt there are lots of people I could marry, you're faced with a variety of options. You have to pick one and decide what's better, what's worse. But once you've gotten married, your spouse is not your spouse because they're the best option, which leaves open the possibility that if they stop being the best option, maybe you'd go try and find someone else. Your spouse is your spouse because they're your spouse. And as your spouse, they could never have been anything but your spouse. You couldn't have picked anyone else.
So you're saying that for Rav Shagar, Judaism, at least if you're born into it, it is you, and it's so self-evident that it no longer is about comparing better or worse ideas. The very question kind of evaporates for Rav Shagar. He's not envious or thinking about, is Buddhism deeper than Judaism, because it's his wife, meaning Judaism is him and he is Judaism.
Yeah, so for Rav Shagar, the value in comparing Judaism to other cultures, religions, philosophies is not to see which is better or to show Judaism is better. It's to see what's different. And in doing that, you highlight what's unique about Judaism. And so he says very often people will go explore other religions. I think the example he gives is sort of Eastern Buddhism and yoga and things like that. And in doing so, they'll see what was special and unique in Judaism that they were never aware of. Part of the danger of the safa model, that Judaism is my language and my home, is that you don't recognize what's special about it. The things that are closest to you and most intimately part of you are always the things you take for granted, and you never see how special they are. So for Rav Shagar, I don't want to compare Judaism to other religions to see which is better and should I keep Judaism or try and convince other people that Judaism is better. I want to look outside in order to get a better view on the inside. That Judaism is the thing for me because I'm Jewish, and that's true if you're born Jewish, but also if you've chosen Judaism. And I think what's powerful about Judaism in this sense is that it speaks to me, and that I speak Judaism in a real sense. And when I try and speak other languages, that gives me a better view on the language of Judaism that I already speak.
I love the metaphor of safa. I mean, it's not a metaphor. It's obviously we're speaking real words. We're using the words Torah, mitzvot, and tefillin, and Shabbat, and kashrut. But I like the metaphor of language because, when I think of, my native tongue is English, it does express better than any other language me, at least from my point of view. I like speaking it the most. I've obviously, I can speak Hebrew, thank God, but it just doesn't encapsulate who I am. I don't feel it does. So I'm not envious. I'm not picking French. Is French better than English? Is German better than English? So if I would learn French or I would learn German, it might give me an insight into something in life, but there's no feeling of I'll drop English and pick up German, because it is me. English is me. So I find that very powerful, that he makes religion if you really like take this metaphor of safa, of language seriously, he really starts, at least he opened my mind to the realization, it couldn't be deeper in another religion. For me, I'm not saying for other people, it just couldn't. There's just too much about me and Judaism that intertwined, and I'd have to literally be a different person to be attracted more to another religion, which doesn't mean I can't read, Christianity. I could read Meister Eckhart and find that interesting, or in Islam, Rumi. There are ideas there, or Soren Kierkegaard, but they don't do the same thing to me. And I find that very interesting. Like, for example, Rav Shagar is obsessed with Rabbi Nachman, and every once in a while he'll compare Rabbi Nachman and say, kind of like Soren Kierkegaard is like that in Christianity, about the absurdity of life. But he doesn't want to go teach Soren Kierkegaard for the rest of his life like he does with Rabbi Nachman. And I think it comes down to, again, Rabbi Nachman is his home. That's his language. And he doesn't know, it's almost like a mysterious connection. Like, why did Rabbi Nachman speak to him more than Rav Kook? And for sure, Rabbi Nachman does speak to him more than Rav Kook, it seems. Doesn't mean Rav Kook isn't powerful for him, but Rabbi Nachman becomes his hero. And I think it's in that way, like, it takes away the choice of Buddhism versus Judaism, but not because it took it away from me. You realized it's exciting that I had something that was so personal, and it's so easy to make it personal. So I want to kind of like hear your opinion. How does that affected you when you started learning about Rav Shagar and like Judaism being your safa, your language? Is that exciting to you? Was that like a new thought?
So it was definitely a new thought. I think it was particularly powerful to me because of the series of ideas that led to it. That on a certain level, I had come to a place where I was really looking for meaning in every mitzvah and everything, and found it all to be incredibly meaningful. But the problem is, then I came to the point where I was doing this incredibly meaningful thing, either putting on tefillin or davening or wearing tzitzit, whatever it is, every day. And meaning does not keep up doing the same thing day after day. So you have to either keep reading books and looking for new ideas, in which case I very much struggled with the fact that I was creating new meaning where the old meaning seemed to have become insufficient. And that kind of challenged the idea of meaning in general. To say like, oh, tefillin is meaningful because it's about, X, but then X stopped being meaningful, so I made it about Y, meant that there was a sort of gap between the meaning and the mitzvah. And realizing that I could make tefillin my home, that it should just be a part of who I am, and had really at that point become a part of who I was. And that could be my starting point, and I could find meaning in it sometimes and not other times, and I could find different meaning at different times. That really, I on some level found it as a broader picture very meaningful, and it also very strongly resonated with my experience. My experience was not, oh, tefillin is inherently meaningful all the time, and it freed me from the feeling that it was problematic, that it wasn't meaningful every time.
Let me add something to that. That's an amazing kind of insight you just brought up. I also feel very much like leading up to it, it was almost this, I don't want to say guilt, but it was a sense of, I feel guilty if every time I do a mitzvah, it isn't the ultimate feeling of spiritual ecstasy. I've studied so many Hasidic, mystical, Kabbalistic, philosophical texts. How could it not be meaningful? It's beneath me for me to do it robotic. And then Rav Shagar kind of frees you from that. Why do you think that's the highest level? Which is an amazing thing for a person who's a spiritual person. I think he says it in Shuvi Nafshi, in his book on Tshuva, where he says that it's almost like the search for ruchaniyut, for spirituality, can be gashmi, can be materialistic, meaning it's no different than being materialistic. Can you say a little bit about that, like why he thinks almost the spiritual quest can be materialistic?
Right, so he talked about this in numerous places. He used a similar idea in Shuvi Nafshi, but particularly throughout the lectures on the Kutei Moharan, he talks about how it's not about spiritual and physical. It's about whether you're trying to acquire and possess something. That what we think of as materialism is something we do in the physical world and in the spiritual world. Materialism being a sense of just wanting to acquire stuff and own stuff, and that somehow when I've amassed more things, I'm better or more whole or whatever. And we do that in spirituality just as much as we do it in the physical world. That I want to have another spiritual experience, that I need to build myself up with the important things that I've learned and discovered about myself and about the world. That there's a moment of in Shuvi Nafshi calls it korban, that you've sacrificed that need to build yourself up, and you've said, it's okay if it's not meaningful, that I can dedicate myself to being who I am even in the absence of meaning. I can serve God without meaning, which in a sense is a return to a pre-modern form of religion that didn't have to be about passion and meaning.
It's weird how that is somehow deeper. I find that it's such a paradox that when you give up the need for it to be ultimate meaning in every second, there's something more satisfying there, and it's not coming from laziness. At the beginning, I used to think, wow, Rav Shagar he doesn't want to put in the work. He, it's too hard. You should work harder. And I guess the Kotzk would say that, Kotzk Rebbe and maybe Simcha Bunim, and they would have very good criticism of Rav Shagar. But I guess when you read enough Rav Shagar, you realize it's not coming from laziness. It's coming from, I tested it, I tried to do that, and like you were describing about yourself, something feels inauthentic about that obsession every second with meaning. It doesn't feel like I'm doing something healthy here.
Well, part of it is was perhaps I found to be the most common repeated theme throughout Rav Shagar's writings, which is about being reflective versus non-reflective, or as he calls it, duality and oneness. That the search for meaning is almost always done from a place of duality, of I'm over here and then there's the meaning. That I stand separate from meaning and I look for it and I acquire it. And what he likes about almost meaningless religion, but also about religion as my home and who I am, is that you speak a language without being separate from that language. You don't stand apart from your language and manipulate it artificially. You and your language are one. It's why you speak without having to carefully construct each and every word of what you're going to say.
I think that's very refreshing for anybody who wants to kind of, who's gone into Hasidut and mysticism, and spent a lot of time searching for deeper meaning in Judaism, and kind of feels like they're at a dead end. I think Rav Shagar really, definitely for you and I, kind of offers a totally kind of like a new way to approach everything, which doesn't get rid of the Hasidut and Kabbalah. Obviously, he quotes them constantly, but it gives, I think, context.
I agree, and just in terms of not getting rid of Hasidut and Kabbalah, it's worth noting that a lot of the statements about religion that doesn't have to be about personal meaning come from quotations from Chabad and Rabbi Tzadok and things like that. So he one of the things he finds in Hasidut is the search for meaning, but he just as much finds the ability to transcend meaning and not need meaning.